Neal is the VP of product at Google, and he's responsible for the ad platform. So that should be of interest to all of us here in the room. So let me stop talking and introduce Neal Mohan from Google and bring him up to stage. Neal. Welcome.
Hey, John, thanks.
That's your seat. All right. Now I'm going to put this down here because I'm told it interferes with the
spotlight there.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's a stage thing, you know. So let me start with this. Google, of all the companies that in the internet and marketing space, digital marketing space, is sort of the 900-pound gorilla of the space, and I mean that in the best of ways. But recently there was some news, and Liz Ross was asked this question, so I thought it was only fair I would ask you. What do you make of the fact that 3 of your competitors have decided to hold hands and sing Kumbaya in order to deal with you?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me. So you know, I don't really have a ton to say about, I'm assuming you're referring to the consortium. You know, I wasn't invited to the dinner, so I don't have a lot of details on what was discussed there.
Must have just gotten lost in the mail.
Probably. But from our perspective, you know, we're continue to focus on what we've been building out through, obviously, all the work we've been doing on our ad exchange, enhancements to the Google Display Network and AdSense, and then obviously a number of our recent acquisitions, Invite Media, et cetera. Our vision is to build this end-to-end platform for buying and selling display advertising. And when we use the word display, from Google's perspective, that really refers to kind of everything that's not search ads, so video, mobile, et cetera. And that's what our publishers and advertisers tell us in terms of what they want to see in our kind of solution as well. So that's what we're focused on.
So when you take that circle around display, mobile, video, you know, traditional display, I suppose you could call it, rich media, so on, do you see a time when display advertising eclipses search in Google's revenue line?
You know, our perspective, and that's a great question. You know, one of the questions I often get asked, which is another way I think of getting at what you're saying, is, you know, why do you have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of engineers across the world focused on display ads? Why have you invested so heavily in building out, you know, Salesforce and account services capability specifically around display and video and mobile? And the answer that I give is pretty simple, which is, as we all know in this room, the display world today is you know, somewhere between a $20 to $30 billion opportunity globally, which of course is a very large market, and it's one that I think we're all happy to play in. You know, obviously Google has made a big investment in it. But you know, kind of the long-term vision from our perspective is, you know, how do we take that market from, let's say, the $25 billion market it is today to a $200 billion market? And so our vision is a pretty expansive one, and it's not a number that we throw out lightly. And especially when you think about the consumer trends in terms of where the audiences are going to consume content, tablets, smartphones, digital TV, et cetera. All of those forms of advertising that go with that type of content distribution are going to look like one flavor of display or another. And so our vision is to build the technology that can support that entire shift, which we think is something north of $200 billion when it happens.
Is part of that because the internet and Google swallows television?
You know, I don't think it's about, you know, swallowing television or not. I mean, the way that at least we think about it, and we've actually gotten away from thinking about sort of, you know, frankly, offline to online. I think we all in this room as consumers would agree that our consumption habits have changed dramatically over the last year or two with the advent of all these devices. Pretty soon, and it's hard to argue that even TV content, you might be watching it on something that looks like a TV screen, but if it's actually getting distributed via IP digitally, then the types of advertising opportunities that come with it look and feel like display from a targeting standpoint in terms of what you can do from a format standpoint, interactivity over the top, et cetera. And for us, it's just a convergence of all of those media into something that looks and feels digital from a consumer standpoint. And when that happens, the ads and media opportunities look and feel to us like something that can be addressed with the display technology that we've been building. And I think that benefits, frankly, everybody: TV advertisers, TV publishers, digital folks, et cetera.
Some folks are a bit either nervous or confused as to what Google's role is in this shift. Both because, I mean, you said the word technology several times and platform several times. I think people understand the idea of Google as a platform company that enables marketing. But Google's also a media company that owns and operates media. You just recently purchased a media company, Zagat. And you have a massive, the largest online advertising network. You also just purchased a supply-side platform which gives you access to what you might call encircled, premium display. You purchased a DSP. What do you say to folks who are a bit concerned or confused by the breadth of your offerings and how some might conflict with the other, and the ability of all those super smart engineers you have behind the curtains who can put a thumb on the scale and perhaps tilt one way or the other towards Google O&O or Google AdSense as opposed to a fair and level playing field?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And so at the most fundamental sense, just to kind of unpack your question a little bit, AdSense, in terms of the offering that we have for publishers, is something that we've seamlessly integrated into our kind of exchange or our platform, if you will. So the 2 million plus AdSense publishers have direct access to all this technology that we've been working on. Similarly, our Google Display Network, through which advertisers buy on through our AdWords interface, is also integrated into this. And so, I don't view those two offerings, and my responsibility is AdSense just as much as it is this platform, as something separate. Because the reason for that is that if you boil it back down to first principles, our publishers, what they tell us is they don't want 25 different sort of technologies or pieces that they have to manage for mobile or video or direct or indirect or yield or different types of formats. They want a platform that can manage all of this on their behalf and that is open, that can plug in other types of technologies, et cetera, but where the work for all that integration is happening via the technology companies that are best at that, so they can focus on what they do, which is building great brands, building an audience, et cetera. And similarly, the conversation on the advertiser and agency side, and which was a big driver behind, for example, our acquisitions of Invite and Terracent and how we're integrating those things with AdWords and DoubleClick, is similar, which is if you're an agency, what the agencies tell me typically is, we don't want a separate buying capability or tool for mobile or video or display or rich media. Our users aren't rich media users or video users or mobile users. They're consumers. How do we reach them holistically? How do we manage reach and frequency and clicks and conversions or what have you, all in a holistic manner? And so our end vision is to build those unified platforms for publishers and advertisers. That drives a lot of our acquisitions. All of these things are integrated into singular suites, if you will. And so that's the first point I wanted to make. I think the other aspect of your question is Google as a media owner itself. And so I wanted to separate that from our Google Display Network and AdSense, which I consider part of this platform, because at the end of the day, it's about results for advertisers and putting money in the pockets of our publishers. Now, we obviously participate on this platform and as part of this network ourselves via, obviously, YouTube and you mentioned Zagat. The driver behind that acquisition really was more around what we can do in terms of providing information and access, phone numbers, addresses, et cetera, for local services. So obviously everybody knows what Zagat focuses on in terms of restaurants and spas and hotels. And so the primary sort of driver behind that was providing those capabilities from a consumer standpoint as part of what we're doing on the local side, integration into search, et cetera. Obviously, there's display advertising to be had with that, but that was not the driver of the deal. And in terms of the media content, it looks and feels a lot like YouTube to us, when a lot of the content is user generated. The technology aspect is how do you actually aggregate that and make it something useful, just like we can do on the YouTube side. So it looked and felt a lot like that from our perspective, but the driver wasn't for our display business. It was really for providing local services to consumers.
The thing about Google that I think maybe in your brand DNA, and I want to get to what is the Google brand question in a second, and it's somewhat unfair, and I'm going to acknowledge so that Neal doesn't feel so on the hot seat to ask Neal questions that may be super googly, and you have one piece of the Google
Sure.
Pie and not the whole thing, but I still get to ask you questions because you're the Google guy here. So this question may be in the, not my responsibility bucket. However, I'm curious. Google's DNA has been, we objectively bring you the best answer, right, for a particular search initially, and then in local we'll bring you the best reviews for any local search, and that has been sort of, I think, your brand. So what happens when you pull on that piece of yarn in a sweater and say, well, actually now we own Zagat, so we're going to favor that review because we own it, or we own YouTube, so we're going to favor these YouTube videos, or we own AdSense, and if you're going to buy on an exchange or in a DSP on our exchange or our DSP, maybe we'll favor that. Do you have Chinese wall protocols in place, and will you publish them so that everyone else can see them?
Yeah, so so I'm going to give you as quick of an answer as I can to
I'm
it.
sorry, it was a
very
long question.
But it's a very involved
and maybe
question,
it was
so.
unfair, but...
Well, let me start with the part that is certainly the most relevant to me in terms of how AdSense and our ad exchange and our DSP and all that stuff play together. The way that we've designed the architecture and the way that we publish white papers that we share with our publishers and advertisers is, our AdSense publishers, they plug into our exchange through essentially a checkbox in their AdSense interface that says, would you like demand from advertisers that may not be coming in through AdWords? And so that's how all those DSPs that buy on our exchange manifest themselves to our AdSense publishers.
Is that opt-in or opt-out?
That's opt-in. And so in terms of whether that's enabled or not.
Yeah.
It's literally a checkbox that's, I believe it may actually be opt-out, but,
right.
But it's literally a checkbox that people can configure, and
right.
it just brings more revenue to our publishers
yeah.
in terms of how they participate. And then then your question about sort of biasing one way or the other. Our advertisers and publishers would see through that in a heartbeat. They're some of the most sophisticated buyers and sellers on the internet. The reason why our business and our volume continues to grow is because they get the best results, whether it's ROI for advertisers or higher yield for publishers. And so it was never a question in the design, and it's something that they would see through in a heartbeat. So we don't do any of that. And frankly, that's never really been a big topic of discussion when I have conversations directly with our publishers and advertisers. On your question about search and kind of search results, Larry has often talked about this, and others within the company. The mantra is exactly the way you described it. If we don't provide what we think is the best information and the most relevant information and the freshest information possible, then we're compromising the value that we're delivering to our advertisers, to our users, and that's kind of tantamount, not just from a Google mission standpoint, but also, as you know, alternatives are a click away, and so we want to make sure that we provide the best service there possible, whether that is one of a result that's associated, for example, with YouTube, or a video from somewhere else. And I think most users see that in terms of how those results are presented. In terms of Chinese walls, you've seen the manifestation of that. When we make even changes to our algorithm, like we did everybody's familiar with the Panda algorithm changes. those are done in a complete sort of Chinese wall manner and independently by our search algorithm team, and that's the way I think Larry intends to keep it, and I think that's the way that makes sense. So that's really been our approach to all of those businesses.
Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
I want to move to the question of display and performance.
Mm-hmm.
I think the rise of the trading desk, exchange, DSP, SSP, RTB,
Right.
acronym,
Three-letter acronyms.
the acronym city that's being built around us, so far seems to be driven by a mantra of performance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, initially it's ad networks, and ad networks were really performance networks. Do you see that continuing, or are we going to see perhaps a new definition of performance? And is Google going to help the industry sort of move up the funnel or up the chain to understanding awareness, perception, and some sort of more brand-related kinds of understanding of the meaning of display?
Yeah. So I think you're right. The advent of all of this new technology driven by things like real-time bidding, data-driven marketing, a big theme of what this conference is about today, has been performance-oriented. At the end of the day, our advertisers and agency partners are measuring, clicks and conversions on behalf of their advertiser clients, and that is, frankly, what a lot of the spend that's going through these systems today. Of course, I don't think that's the be-all and end-all. To get to that $200 billion number that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, that can't all be performance advertising, although a fairly large chunk of the overall $600 billion media market is performance-oriented, but a huge part of it is brand, including the $170 billion plus that's spent on TV globally. And so everything that we're working towards, that we're building in this technology stack, is with very much an eye towards how do we deliver the capabilities that brand advertisers are looking for, which of course benefits them, but in turn will hopefully translate into a lot more revenue for for all the premium publisher partners and the long-tail publisher partners that we work with. So just some examples of that we have gotten in terms of feedback from our agency partners is enabling, for example, our exchange to support video formats, richer mobile formats, which is the purview of a lot of brand advertisers. So those are things that everybody can look for in the coming weeks and months. But above and beyond that, we're also working at moving beyond the types of targeting that exists in this world around remarketing and on those types of things to models that essentially feel more upper funnel type models. So how do I reach a much broader demographic? Mm-hmm. How do I map what I'm buying via these platforms or via my trading desk to the way that I buy TV in terms of the segments that I buy on TV, with obviously the additional benefit that I can actually measure it much more effectively online, which gets to the third part, which is where I think a lot of innovation is going to happen that I'm particularly excited about, which is how do we define sort of the equivalent of the click for brand advertisers. Given how the click actually drove a lot of the performance advertising world because of its connection to online sales and conversions, what is that equivalent going to look like in the brand space? And I think that is an unsolved problem for the industry. It's an area that we're excited to be focused on and working on, and so I think we should all look for a lot of innovation happening there in the course of the next several months and years.
Let me ask you one more quick question that's related to that, and then I have a question from the Twitterverse here. Generally speaking, at least initially in the first year or so, premium publishers, say the board of the Online Publishers Association,
sure,
right, have been extremely wary of trading desks, DSPs, and so on, to the point where they've formed private exchanges or pulled their inventory entirely from AdSense or from any exchange or so on. How do you assuage them and say, don't worry, guys, the water's fine?
Yeah. So I think a few things matter there most, at least in my conversations with publishers. I think the first and foremost is actually control. So, and what I mean by that is our publisher partners tell us that they need to feel like they're in control of their destiny in terms of what inventory shows up where, how their data gets protected. That's obviously a big and long conversation we can have in terms of how technology is going to provide for that, how channel conflicts can be avoided, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, publishers, do they participate branded or not branded, et cetera. So that's point number one. The second point, of course, is yield, revenue. So if these technologies have to generate more yield than the alternative. And so those two things have been a focus for us. We recently, you know, did a survey of all the premium publishers, actually all the publishers, period, that participate on our exchange and in the AdSense network, to see the type of lifts that they were seeing through the technology that we provide to them. And what we found was, on average, 188% increase in revenue. So not increase in eCPMs, increase in actual dollars in the pockets of our publishers, subject to all of their controls. And that's the reason why, you know, our exchange platform continues to grow. It's grown, you know, 3x in the last couple quarters, and you know, a ton of that growth is coming from, you know, the hundreds of sort of biggest sort of media brands in the world. So, you know, when people talk about the type of inventory that's there, I like to make it very clear that many of the participants are, you know, our kind of most strategic premium publisher partners, because we can deliver on these two things for them. So that's so we're very excited about that.
I think there's some primal fear that the seduction of increased earnings from AdX and exchanges and AdSense and so on is undermining the essence of what a publication is, which is a communication between an author and a reader, or a creator and a consumer. And without the ability to manage that advertising connection as the third leg of that stool, the advertiser, the publisher, the author, there's a concern that there's a disintermediation. It isn't just about salespeople losing their jobs, but I imagine some salespeople are concerned about that. It's losing your soul as a publication. Mm-hmm. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so the first, and I'll be the first to say this, everything that we've talked about here, I certainly don't think applies to every single piece of inventory at a publisher, or every single product that that publisher can offer to its largest advertiser and agency clients. You know, I think that a lot of our technology, and that's the reason why I gave such a long answer to your brand question, a lot of our technology needs to focus on creating you know, more innovative ways to do custom sponsorships, to be able to actually do those things at scale, so that you don't spend, you know, 6 weeks on one single publisher's
right.
website, but something that you can actually
you do
more
some kind of
scale.
high-end integrated community-driven custom thing that you can then blow out using an API that connects into the scale of an ad exchange.
And I think technology, well, I think technology can help on that sort of what you're talking about, that sort of premium, let's call it the 20% of all inventory that is that, you know, directly sold, guaranteed sponsorship type of inventory. Mm-hmm. What our publishers tell us is that's where they want to focus. That's where obviously a lot of the value they can add to their advertisers sits. And if technology can help them with the rest of their inventory by either connecting those two pieces, the directly sold and indirectly some way, or allowing them to focus more resources on the premium piece, as opposed to having a bunch of people manipulate spreadsheets and do these types of cookie overlays and all that sort of stuff that was happening before. For the rest of it, if technology can take care of that for them, subject to their controls, then I think we're accomplishing a lot of what at least our publisher partners are telling us they want to see from us.
One of the good questions I got just over the transom here is Google Plus has been a very interesting story for your company.
Sure.
A big hit in the blogosphere initially. Everyone sort of rushed to it and wanted to check it out. But we've seen that movie a number of times, where people get excited about something and then they sort of stop being excited about it. Google just made a bunch of announcements this morning about opening it up to everybody and a number of other things. I think what this audience is interested in is is that inventory on Google Plus, as it expands, going to be available as inventory that might be marketing inventory, number one? And number two, are you going to solve for the equivalent of the brand page on Google Plus such that marketers can have a presence there?
So the first thing that I'll say about Google Plus is that it's still really early days for us. It's an area where we're obviously we're bullish on it, and we're investing heavily. But it is a relatively it's relatively early in the product life cycle. It's only been out for a few weeks. As you mentioned, we continue to grow it in terms of user adoption and growth, including some of the announcements today. From an advertising standpoint, I think it's still too early to say how we're thinking about the property itself in terms of the creative opportunities there and what we can do for marketers. We are looking to bring Google Plus +1 technology to our advertising formats, similar to how you can see +1, for example, on search ad results today on the website. You can imagine that expanding from there. And then on your last question about brand pages, et cetera, we are working on capabilities there, so you should stay tuned over the course of the next weeks and months in terms of what we're going to be providing to marketers in terms of canvas that looks and feels like a brand page.
Great. Are there any questions before we wrap up? Because we're already running over time, but I want to let you guys ask a question if there are any questions for Neal and Google. Oh, you are such a quiet crowd. Should I open the curtains? All right. Well, since we are already 6 minutes over, please join me in thanking Neal for coming here. And
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, John.
Great.
All right, great.